It's as American as apple pie.
340 horse, 4-speed.
Oh, it looks like it's been sitting for a while. Look at all the mold. It's been repainted, obviously. Whoever restored it painted, but this might be the original color.
It's the original color, I know that for sure.
There it is.
You know how some garages are packed with old tools, dusty boxes, and things nobody has touched in years? Well, Frank Fritz's garage turned out to be something completely different. After the cameras stopped rolling and the spotlight faded, people began taking a closer look at what had been sitting behind those doors all along. What they uncovered wasn't just a collection of forgotten items. It was a treasure trove of rare discoveries, personal memories, and shocking surprises that nobody expected. Could one garage really hold secrets worth a fortune and stories no one saw coming? Frank Fritz's hidden garage treasures. What could make a man known for chasing forgotten treasures quietly shut his garage door before anyone could ask another question? For Frank Fritz, old machines were never simply objects. They carried memories, craftsmanship, and pieces of American history that he believed deserved another chance. That passion was visible on American pickers, but his Iowa garage revealed a much deeper obsession. Tucked away inside was a remarkable collection that included a 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air, a 1967 Ford Fairlane GT390, and a fully equipped 1960 Cadillac Fleetwood acquired with Mike Wolfe. Frank even owned two 1954 Nash Healey sports cars, purchased together for $46,000, along with a rare 1914 Metz cycle car valued at roughly $35,000. Yet the vehicle that seemed to capture the mystery surrounding his collection was something far more unusual. Its appearance offered few clues. The finish was faded and strangely smooth, showing the marks of age without looking completely destroyed. It seemed less like a ruined automobile and more like a forgotten relic that had somehow survived decades untouched. Frank never treated it like a trophy. When the unusual machine arrived, he simply guided it into his garage with remarkable care, as though he were protecting something far more valuable than metal and rubber. A neighbor who had watched Frank's private routines for years could not ignore the sight. Curious, they finally asked what the strange vehicle actually was. Frank paused beside it, studying its shape before quietly replying, "It's older than you think." That brief answer only made the mystery deeper. Instead of explaining, he moved the vehicle farther inside and closed the door. Perhaps that reaction made sense when considering what else Frank treasured. His collection included an Italian sports car from 1947, the Tusitalia Nuvolari Spider, believed to be worth more than $500,000. But money was never the real attraction. Frank saw stories where others saw rust. Every dent, faded panel, and unusual design could reveal something about the people who once owned it, and the world that produced it. His garage was therefore less like a showroom and more like a private museum, where forgotten history could quietly wait for someone who understood its value. And that mysterious arrival suggested there was still much more inside Frank Fritz's world than viewers ever saw. Frank Fritz saw forgotten objects as pieces of history, not worthless junk, which made his private Iowa garage more than a simple collection. But what was he protecting behind those doors? And what could be hidden inside that revealed just how deeply he valued the past? Stay with us to uncover what was really hiding behind that garage door. Frank Fritz's hidden Iowa garage. Frank Fritz had a strange way of looking at forgotten things. While most people saw rust, broken parts, and vehicles that had clearly seen better days, Frank saw stories waiting to be rescued. He could pick up an old piece of metal and explain where it came from, what it had once been used for, and why throwing it away would mean losing a small piece of history. That was the real secret behind his collection. He wasn't chasing fame or trying to impress anyone. He simply couldn't stand watching interesting pieces of the past disappear. And perhaps that explains why his Iowa garage remained so private. There were no crowds, flashy displays, or carefully staged tours. Inside, dusty shelves, grease-covered tools, aging parts, and forgotten machines filled the space. Frank could spend hours there, quietly sorting through his treasures or working on something most people would have walked past without a second glance. For him, the garage wasn't just storage. It was almost a personal museum where damaged and unwanted objects were given another chance. But what makes the story more fascinating is what happened as Frank's life became increasingly private. In 2020, he stepped away from American Pickers, pointing to back surgery and ongoing health problems. As his condition worsened, he appeared less often in public and became increasingly difficult to reach. Still, his instinct for unusual finds never completely disappeared. Even when he couldn't personally inspect everything, Frank continued adding vehicles and parts to his collection, sometimes relying on people he trusted. One of his final acquisitions, however, was unlike the polished classics viewers might have expected from someone with his eye for automobiles. It looked almost forgotten. There was no gleaming chrome, dramatic paintwork, or powerful engine announcing its importance. Instead, the vehicle sat covered in faded, uneven paint, its unusual shape making it difficult to identify at first glance. To an ordinary observer, it could have seemed like nothing more than an abandoned relic. But Frank had spent decades learning that the most valuable discoveries don't always look valuable. That battered machine raised a much bigger mystery. What had Frank recognized in it that everyone else had missed? And when the contents of his garage were finally examined, that question became impossible to ignore. Frank Fritz's garage hid a machine so strange that even he refused to explain it. But what was this mysterious vehicle? And why did its discovery after his death suddenly make his cryptic warning years earlier seem far more significant than anyone imagined? Stay with us to uncover what was really hiding behind that garage door. Let's find out. The mystery car in Frank's garage. There was one vehicle in Frank Fritz's Iowa garage that never seemed to belong with the others. It had no obvious badge, no manufacturer markings, and none of the familiar design features that usually reveal a car's age or origin. It looked almost like someone had taken pieces from different eras and created something entirely its own. Years earlier, a neighbor had caught Frank moving the strange machine into the garage and naturally asked what it was. Frank's answer was brief but unforgettable. "It's older than you think." Then he shut the door. That strange encounter took on a completely different meaning after Frank's death, when his estate was opened and investigators were finally allowed inside the garage. What they discovered was far more carefully preserved than anyone expected. 8 vehicles sat inside, arranged with remarkable order, almost as though Frank had intended the space to become a private museum. Among them were recognizable treasures, including the turquoise 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air, the restored 1967 Fairlane GT390, and a gleaming Cadillac Fleetwood. Each had a story that could be traced through the world of classic automobiles, but the real surprise was waiting farther back. Partly hidden beneath a weathered gray tarp, stained by years of oil, dust, and neglect, sat the vehicle Frank had once refused to explain. Unlike the other cars, it offered almost no clues. No clear model identity, no familiar styling, nothing that immediately told investigators where it came from or why Frank had kept it hidden for so long. The garage had suddenly become more than a collection of old cars. It was a puzzle, and that forgotten machine appeared to be the missing piece. Frank had spent years surrounded by unusual artifacts, but his cryptic warning suggested this particular vehicle carried a story even he wasn't ready to share. Now, with the doors finally opened, the mystery that had been locked away for years was impossible to ignore. At first, the forgotten car seemed like an unusual Corvette, but the missing VIN and mysterious brass plate changed everything. So what was this strange machine hiding? And why couldn't its numbers be traced to General Motors? Let's uncover the astonishing details. The mystery Corvette-like car. When the garage was finally opened, one forgotten machine immediately demanded attention. Beneath an old tarp sat a car that looked enough like a Corvette to fool anyone at first glance. Yet something about it felt completely different. Its body sat unusually low, the front nose stretched forward with a sharp, aggressive shape, while the wide rear gave it the look of a machine built for a racetrack, rather than an ordinary road. The fiberglass body only made the mystery deeper. Then investigators noticed something that made the discovery even stranger. There was no normal VIN in the expected location. Instead, a small brass plate had been fixed to the firewall, carrying a faded string of numbers that could not be matched to General Motors records. Underneath were 3 remarkable words: experimental use only. That detail changed everything. A vintage racing expert later examined the vehicle and reached a startling conclusion. He believed it closely resembled a 1963 Grand Sport Corvette, one of the most legendary racing machines ever associated with Chevrolet. The problem was that General Motors officially built only 5 Grand Sports, and those cars were already known, documented, and accounted for. So how could something resembling another one have ended up quietly sitting inside Frank Fritz's garage? Perhaps it was an unrecorded prototype. Maybe engineers secretly created an additional car before the racing program was shut down. Or perhaps Frank had somehow acquired an extraordinary replica made using original-style molds and components. No answer could immediately explain it. What made the discovery even more fascinating was the possibility that Frank himself understood exactly how unusual the car was. He had spent years collecting forgotten treasures, but this particular machine appeared to have been kept far more carefully out of sight. Whatever its true identity, the mysterious Corvette-like car suggested that Frank's garage may have contained far more than ordinary antiques and collectibles, and that some secrets were destined to remain hidden until after he was gone. A mysterious note in Frank Fritz's garage seemed harmless until an unusual Corvette-like vehicle gave its words new meaning. But what was Frank really referring to? Where did the strange vehicle come from? And what hidden story was waiting to be uncovered? Let's find out. Frank Fritz's garage mystery. A faded note tucked above Frank Fritz's old workbench may have been the strangest thing left behind in the entire garage. Covered in dust and almost swallowed by years of grime, the handwritten message contained only a few words. I left behind everything there. At first glance, it sounded like an ordinary farewell, but once the unusual Corvette-like vehicle was discovered nearby, those words suddenly felt much more deliberate. That was when the story surrounding Frank's collection became far more mysterious. The vehicle did not appear to be an ordinary classic car, and its unusual appearance quickly fueled questions about where it came from. One theory claimed Frank had obtained it sometime in the early 2000s through a private connection with a retired General Motors engineer. According to the story, the man may have had access to experimental parts, early designs, or vehicles that were never officially revealed. Another theory pointed toward Flint, Michigan, a place deeply connected to General Motors and America's automobile industry. Some believed Frank may have encountered the car through an estate sale, where an unusual machine could easily have escaped public attention. Then came the theory that made the discovery even more fascinating. Some enthusiasts suggested the vehicle could have been a secret mule car, similar to experimental machines reportedly used while engineers were developing high-performance Corvette technology around the 1960s. These test cars could be modified repeatedly to study engines, suspension, body shapes, and racing performance before production models were finalized. Others went even further, claiming Frank's vehicle might have been an unofficial creation assembled by engineers using original molds and components away from the normal production process. If true, it could explain why its history seemed so difficult to trace. Of course, none of these theories have been firmly proven, yet that mysterious note remains impossible to ignore. Why would Frank write that he had left behind everything there? And what exactly was the there he meant? Whatever the answer, the discovery transformed an old garage into something far more intriguing, a place where forgotten machinery, unanswered questions, and a hidden piece of automotive history may have been waiting quietly all along. Frank Fritz spent years uncovering forgotten treasures, yet one mysterious car remained hidden even from those closest to him. Why did he keep this remarkable vehicle completely out of the spotlight? And what secrets did collectors uncover when its existence finally came to light? Stay with us as the mystery begins to unfold. Frank Fritz's secret Corvette mystery. Frank Fritz had a way of finding things most people would walk straight past. But one discovery was so unusual that even he kept it almost completely hidden. Long before his passing in 2024, Frank had quietly protected a mysterious car tucked away from public attention. There were no proud photographs, no television reveal, and no casual stories for friends to piece together. For someone whose career was built around uncovering forgotten treasures, this silence felt strangely deliberate. The mystery only grew when word of the vehicle reached the collector world. Suddenly, enthusiasts were comparing photographs, studying old factory records, and examining every visible detail for clues about its identity. Some believed the car could have connections to General Motors, while others suspected it was an experimental vehicle that had somehow escaped the company's records. The most fascinating theories suggested it might have been connected to an obscure chapter of Corvette history, something never properly documented for the public. What made the situation even more remarkable was the reaction from serious collectors. Once rumors spread, interest quickly turned into serious money. Museums reportedly wanted the opportunity to preserve such a rare piece of automotive history, while private collectors were prepared to pay extraordinary amounts simply to possess it. One rumored buyer was even said to have offered something close to a blank check. Yet nothing changed. The estate did not surrender the vehicle, and no dramatic auction followed. The mysterious car remained protected, much like Frank had kept it during his lifetime. That decision says something important about the man behind the television personality. Frank was never simply chasing expensive antiques or impressive finds. He seemed fascinated by the stories attached to forgotten objects, the people who owned them, the places they came from, and the history that might otherwise disappear. Born in 1965 and remembered by millions through American pickers, Frank became known for his humor, curiosity, and unmistakably down-to-earth personality. He traveled through barns, garages, and forgotten corners of America searching for pieces of the past. But his greatest legacy may have been the excitement he created around discovery itself. After his death at the age of 60, tributes reminded fans that his impact extended far beyond television. Still, one question refuses to disappear. What exactly was Frank protecting so carefully? And why did he choose to keep its story almost entirely to himself? Perhaps the answer was sitting quietly in that garage all along, a treasure he valued not because of what it could sell for, but because of what it represented. Frank Fritz may have uncovered countless automotive treasures, but what if his most mysterious discovery was the one he kept hidden from the world? What was this strange Corvette-like machine? And why did its unusual details seem to hold a story even Frank himself couldn't fully explain? Let's unravel the details. Frank Fritz's forgotten Corvette mystery. His greatest treasure may not have been the rarest car people ever saw him uncover. It may have been the one almost nobody saw at all. Hidden away from cameras, collectors, and curious eyes, a mysterious Corvette-like machine sat quietly inside Frank Fritz's world, carrying a question that could still have no definite answer. For Frank, an old car was never simply an old car. Every dent, unusual part, faded badge, and strange design could hold a piece of history. That way of thinking made him different from collectors who measured their treasures by price or popularity. He looked for meaning. He wanted to understand why something existed and what story had been forgotten behind it. That may explain why this particular car remained untouched. There was no grand unveiling, no dramatic announcement, and no attempt to turn it into a headline. Instead, it stayed exactly where it had been left, almost as though Frank believed disturbing it would somehow destroy what made it special. Was it really connected to the legendary Grand Sport Corvette? An experimental General Motors project? Or something created so convincingly that even experienced eyes could struggle to identify it? The mystery only became more powerful because there was so little certainty surrounding it. Rumors pointed in different directions, while possible records and old documents remained just that, possibilities. Nothing seemed strong enough to settle the question, and perhaps Frank was perfectly comfortable with that. When Frank Fritz died on September 30, 2024, he left behind much more than a collection of classic automobiles and unusual memorabilia. He left behind unfinished questions, forgotten stories, and objects that seemed to reveal something about the man himself. The hidden car became almost symbolic of his entire approach to collecting. Careful, curious, and deeply respectful of the past. Unlike treasures displayed proudly behind glass, this one gained its power through silence. It did not need crowds, auction prices, or magazine covers to prove that it mattered. Its very uncertainty became part of its identity. Maybe that was the lesson Frank understood better than most. Some discoveries are valuable because they can be explained, while others become unforgettable precisely because they cannot. The mysterious car may eventually be identified, or it may remain a question forever. Either way, it preserves something of Frank's spirit, a fascination with the overlooked, a respect for history, and the belief that not every treasure needs to be revealed to the world. Sometimes, the greatest story is the one that remains hidden. So, what do you think was hiding inside Frank Fritz's garage that left everyone speechless? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe.